Before the 7 layers start, there are actually 2 layers, and this is called the pre-purgatory or anti-purgatory. The first layer of the pre-purgatory is for the excommunicated, and for every year they were excommunicated for, they have to stay here at the bottom of the mountain for 30 times the length of that time. So if you get kicked out of the church for 1 year, you spend 30 years here stuck at the bottom of the mountain. The second layer is for people who died without confessing. So usually people who died unpredictable deaths like accidents or sudden fatal injuries, or simply people who tried to turn to God too late in life. For example, a man who only repented for his sins on his deathbed, or a soldier who died in battle and forgot to confess his sins before death. Also, every time someone is done with their punishment, the entire mountain shakes. That does not mean that that person in question will go straight to heaven. It just means that they can move up the mountain to the next layer. So people can go through multiple sentences and different layers. So for example, someone that committed both the sins of pride and sloth have to go through the punishment of pride first because it's the first layer, and once they're done, the mountain shakes and then they can move up to the layer of sloth and begin their punishment there until they're done. Then the mountain shakes again and then they can go to heaven if they haven't committed any more sins. However, before going to heaven, they have to go through the layer of lust even if they haven't committed lust. But I'll explain that part later. Some of these processes can take thousands of years depending on how long it takes for the person to repent. Pride. The 7 layers of purgatory are directly connected to the 7 deadly sins. So the first layer from bottom to top is pride. Every layer of the purgatory is filled with a trait opposite to that sin. So in this case, the trait opposite to pride is humility. And so, people here are forced to carry massive heavy stones on their back equivalent to the size of their pride during their life. And these people are constantly praying for the people on earth. So to show their humility, they pray that others will live their lives on earth better than they did so that they don't have to face the same consequences and instead go directly to heaven. Envy. The punishment for envy is becoming blind. The people here have their eyes wired shut with copper wire because during their life they looked at other people's possessions too much. The opposite trait to envy is generosity. So in this layer, it's very common to hear people talk about the Virgin Mary for her several acts of generosity throughout her life, most notably accepting to be Jesus' mother. Wrath. The opposite of wrath is meekness. So Dante, the writer of the book, gives an example for meekness being the stoning of Stephen, where even though he was being stoned to death, he still chose to show compassion and prayed that God wouldn't hold the sin of wrath against the people stoning him. The punishment for this layer is a giant dark cloud of smoke everywhere. The idea for that is that since these people were blinded by rage during their lifetime, now they have to spend time in purgatory repenting for that sin by being blinded by this smoke as well. Dante here explains that the purgatory is divided into 2 parts, lower and upper. All of these 7 sins come from a place of love, but misdirected love. The lower purgatory are the 3 sins we just saw, and they represent love placed on material things or yourself. So for example, when you love someone else's possessions, that's just your mind convincing itself that your envy is actually just love. The upper purgatory represents love that either goes too far or not far enough in one way or another. So from now on, the next sins are all part of the upper purgatory, which means that the punishments are less severe. Sloth. The opposite to sloth is zeal, so the people here are forced to run around non-stop as a way of countering all of their laziness throughout their lives. Sloth is in the upper purgatory simply because you can be doing the right thing, but if you're lazy about it and don't do it enough, you'll end up here. So it's an example of good love, but just not enough. Greed. The punishment here is that people are just bound to the ground by their feet and hands, being forced to lay down until they have repented for their sin. The opposite of greed, according to Dante, is being poor, or specifically being satisfied or content with poverty. So the people stuck here for being greedy are constantly talking about how Mary was poor during her life, but poverty never concerned her. Wanting to be successful and live a comfortable life is okay, but greed represents wanting too much success to the point where you hurt others for your personal gain. Gluttony. The punishment here is that there are trees that bear fruits with an extremely good aroma that makes people go incredibly hungry. These fruits are the original fruits from the Garden of Eden, of which humanity committed the very first sin. The fruits also never fall from the trees, and the people reaching for them have the impression that they keep getting closer and closer but never actually reach it. The purpose for that is to force people into temperance, which is the opposite of gluttony, or simply to teach them to resist temptation, considering that gluttony here also involves addictions like alcohol. Lust. The punishment here is a fire that people have to run through to get purified. And also, these flames are the last step to enter heaven for everybody, regardless of what sin they committed or what punishment they went through. So the people who committed the sin of lust don't really suffer any punishments besides having to walk on these flames just like everybody else, except a little longer. The reason for that is because lust is the easiest sin to commit, so its punishment should be less severe. Also, Dante explains that in hell, the second layer, the one after limbo, is also lust, meaning that in hell, just like the purgatory, lust has the least severe punishment. Although Dante never explains how lust is both in hell and the purgatory, so if you commit the sin of lust, you'll never know whether you're going to hell or purgatory until you get there. Also, in this layer, apparently people are kissing each other, and whenever they try to go further than that, everyone starts laughing at them and talking about chastity, which is the opposite of lust. After the final layer, at the very top of the mountain, is the Garden of Eden. This is where people go after going through the purgatory in order to enter heaven, since the garden serves as a gate to heaven.